End of Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 of the best Christmas pageant ever. I know that many of you would like to be Mary in our pageant, but of course we can only have one Mary. So I'll ask for volunteers, and then we'll all decide together which girl should get the part. That was pretty safe to say, since the only person who ever raised her hand was Alice Winkledon. But Alice just sat there, chewing on a piece of her hair and looking down at the floor. And the only person who raised her hand this time was Imogene Herdman. "Do you have a question, Imogene?" Mother asked. I guess that was the only reason she could think of for Imogene to have her hand up. "No," Imogene said, "I want to be Mary." She looked back over her shoulder, "And Ralph wants to be Joseph." "Yeah," Ralph said. Mother just stared at them. It was like a detective movie when the nice little old gray-haired lady sticks a gun in the back window and says, "Give me all your money," and you can't believe it. Mother couldn't believe this. "Well," she said after a minute, "we want to be sure that everyone has a chance. Does anyone else want to volunteer for Joseph?" No one did. No one ever did, especially not Elmer Hopkins. But he couldn't do anything about it because he was the minister's son. One year he didn't volunteer to be Joseph, and neither did anyone else, and afterwards I heard Reverend Hopkins talking to Elmer out in the hall. "You're going to be Joseph," Reverend said. "That's it." "I don't want to be Joseph," Elmer told him. "I'm too big, and I feel dumb up there, and all those little kids give me a pain in the neck." "I can understand that," Reverend Hopkins said. "I can even sympathize, but till somebody else volunteers for Joseph, you're stuck with it." "Nobody's ever going to do that," Elmer said. "I even offered Grady Baker 50 cents to be Joseph, and he wouldn't do it. I'm going to have to be Joseph for the rest of my life." "Cheer up," Reverend Hopkins told him. "Maybe somebody will turn up." I'll bet he didn't think that somebody would be that somebody would be Ralph Herdman. "All right," Mother said. "Ralph will be our Joseph. Now, does anyone else want to volunteer to be Mary?" Mother looked around, trying to catch somebody's eye, anybody's eye. "Janet, Roberta, Alice, don't you want to volunteer this year?" "No," Alice said so low you could hardly hear her. "I don't want to." Nobody volunteered to be Wiseman either, except Leroy Claude and Ollie Herdman. So there was my mother, stuck with a Christmas pageant full of Herdmans in the main roles. There was one Herdman left over, and one main role left over, and you didn't have to be very smart to figure out that Gladys was going to be the angel of the Lord. "What do I have to do?" Gladys wanted to know. "The angel of the Lord was the one who brought the good news to the shepherds," Mother said. Right away, all the shepherds began to wiggle around in their seats, figuring that any good news Gladys brought them would come with a smack in the teeth. Charlie's friend, Hobby Carmichael, raised his hand and said, "I can't be a shepherd. We're going to Philadelphia." "Why didn't you say so before?" Mother asked. "I forgot." Another kid said, "My mother doesn't want me to be a shepherd." "Why not?" Mother said. "I don't know. She just said don't be a shepherd." One kid was honest. "Gladys Herdman hits too hard," he said. "Why, Gladys isn't going to hit anybody," Mother said. "What an idea. The angel just visits the shepherd in the fields and tells them Jesus is born." "And hits him," said the kid. Of course he was right. You could just picture Gladys whamming shepherds left and right, but Mother said that was perfectly ridiculous. "I don't want to hear another word about it," she said. "No shepherds may quit or get sick," she added before the kid in the front pew could ask. While everybody was leaving, Mother grabbed Alice Winkledon by the arm and said, "Alice, why in the world didn't you raise your hand to be Mary?" "I don't know," Alice said, looking mad. "But I knew. I'd heard Imogene Herdman telling Alice what would happen to her if she dared to volunteer. All the ordinary, everyday Herdman things, like clonking you in the head and drawing pictures all over your homework papers and putting worms in your coat pocket." "I don't care," Alice told her. "I don't care what you do. I'm always Mary in the pageant." "And next spring," Imogene went on, squinching up her eyes, "when the pussy willows come out, I'll stick a pussy willow so far down your ear nobody can reach it. And it'll sprout there and it'll grow, and you'll spend the rest of your life with a pussy willow bush growing out of your ear." You had to admire her. That was the worst thing any of them ever thought up to do. Of course, some people might not think that could happen, but it could. Ollie Herdman did it once. He got this terrible earache in school, and when the nurse looked down his ear with her little lighted tube, she yelled so loud you could hear her all the way down the hall. "He's got something growing down there," she hollered. They had to take Ollie to the hospital and put him under and dig the sprouted pussy willow out of his ear. So that was why Alice kept her mouth shut about being Mary. "You know she wouldn't do all those things," she said. I told Alice as we walked home. "Yes, she would," Alice said. "Herdmans will do anything, but your mother should have told them no. Somebody should put Imogene out of the pageant, and all the rest of them, too. They'll do something terrible and ruin the whole thing." I thought she was probably right, and so did a lot of other people, and for 2 or 3 days all anybody could talk about was the Herdmans being Mary and Joseph and all. Mrs. Homer McCarthy called Mother to say that she had been thinking about it, and if the Herdmans wanted to participate in our Christmas celebration, why didn't we let them hand out programs at the door? "We don't have programs for the Christmas pageant," Mother said. "Well, maybe we ought to get some printed and put the Herdmans in charge of that." Alice's mother told the ladies' aid that it was sacrilegious to let Imogene Herdman be Mary. Somebody we never heard of called up Mother on the telephone and said her name was Hazel Beck and she lived in Sproul Hill. And was it true that Imogene Herdman was going to be Mary, the mother of Jesus, in a church play? "Yes," Mother said. "Imogene is going to be Mary in our Christmas pageant." "And the rest of them too?" the lady asked. "Yes, Ralph is going to be Joseph, and the others are the wise men and the angel of the Lord." "You must be crazy," this Mrs. Hazel Beck told Mother. "I live next door to that outfit with their yelling and screaming and their insane cat and their garage door going up and down all day long, and let me tell you, you're in for a rowdy time." Some people said it wasn't fair for a whole family who didn't even go to our church to barge in and take over the pageant. My father said somebody better lock up the Women's Society silver service. My mother said she would rather be in the hospital with Mrs. Armstrong. But then the flower committee took a potted geranium to Mrs. Armstrong and told her what was going on, and she nearly fell out of her bed, traction bars and all. "I feel personally responsible," she said. "Whatever happens, I accept the blame. If I had been up and around and doing my duty, this never would have happened." And that made my mother so mad she couldn't see straight. "If she'd been up and around, it wouldn't have happened," Mother said. "That woman, she must be surprised the sun is still coming up every morning without her supervising the sunrise." "Well, then let me tell you." "Don't tell me," my father said. "I'm on your side." "I just mean that Helen Armstrong's not the only woman alive who can run a Christmas pageant. Up till now, I'd made up my mind to just do the best I could under the circumstances. But now," she stabbed a meat fork into the pot roast, "I'm going to make this the very best Christmas pageant anybody ever saw, and I'm going to do it with the Herdmans, too. After all, they raised their hands and nobody else did, and that's that." And it was, too. For one thing, nobody else wanted to take over the pageant, with or without Herdmans. And for another thing, Reverend Hopkins got fed up with all the complaints and told everybody where to get off. Of course, he didn't say, "Go jump in the lake, Mrs. Winkledon," or anything like that. He just reminded everyone what Jesus said, "Suffer the little children to come under me." Jesus meant all the little children, including Herdmans. So that shut everybody up, even Alice's mother. And next Wednesday, we started rehearsals. Chapter 4. The first pageant rehearsal was usually about as much fun as a 3-hour ride on the school bus and just as noisy and crowded. This rehearsal, though, was different. Everybody shut up and settled down right away for fear of missing something awful that the Herdmans might do. They got there 10 minutes late, sliding into the room like a bunch of outlaws about to shoot up a saloon. When Leroy passed Charlie, he knuckled him behind the ear, and one little primary girl yelled as Gladys went by. But Mother had said she was going to ignore everything except blood, and since the primary kid wasn't bleeding, and neither was Charlie, nothing happened. Mother said, "And here's the Herdman family. We're glad to see you all," which was probably the biggest lie ever said right out loud in the church. Imogene smiled, the Herdman smile, we called it, sly and sneaky, and there they sat, the closest thing to criminals that we knew about. And they were going to represent the best and most beautiful. No wonder everybody was so worked up. Mother started to separate everyone into angels and shepherds and guests at the end. But right away she ran into trouble. Who were the shepherds? Leroy Herman wanted to know. Where did they come from? Ollie Herdman didn't even know what a shepherd was. Or anyway, that's what he said. What was the inn? Claude asked. What's an inn? It's like a motel, somebody told him, where people go to spend the night. What people? Claude asked. Jesus? Oh, honestly, Alice Winkledum grumbled. Jesus wasn't even born yet. Mary and Joseph went there. Why? Asked Ralph. What happened first? Imogene hollered at my mother. Begin at the beginning. That really scared me because the beginning would be the book of Genesis where it says, in the beginning. And if we were going to have to start with the book of Genesis, we'd never get through. The thing was, the Hermans didn't know anything about the Christmas story. They knew that Christmas was Jesus' birthday, but everything else was news to them. The shepherds, the wise men, the star of the stable, the crowded inn. It was hard to believe. At least it was hard for me to believe. Alice Winkledum said she didn't have any trouble believing it. How would they find out about the Christmas story? She said. They don't even know what the Bible is. Look what Gladys did to the Bible last week. While Imogene was snitching money from the collection plate in my class, Gladys and Ollie drew mustaches and tails on all the disciples in the primary grade illustrated Bible. They never went to church in their whole life till your little brother told them we got refreshments, Alice said, and all you ever hear about Christmas in school is how to make ornaments out of aluminum foil. So how would they know about the Christmas story? She was right. Of course, they might have read about it, but they never read anything except Amazing Comics. And they might have heard about it on TV, except that Ralph paid 65 cents for their TV at a garage sale, and you couldn't see anything on it unless somebody held out onto the antenna. Even then, you couldn't see much. The only other way for them to hear about the Christmas story was from their parents, and I guess Mr. Herdman never got around to it before he climbed on the railroad train. And it was pretty clear that Mrs. Herdman had given up ever trying to tell them anything. So they just didn't know, and Mother said she had better begin by reading the Christmas story from the Bible. This was a pain in the neck to most of us because we knew the whole thing backward and forward and never had to be told anything except who we were supposed to be and where we were supposed to stand. Joseph and Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. Pregnant, yelled Ralph Herdman. Well, that stirred things up. All the big kids began to giggle, and all the little kids wanted to know what was so funny. And Mother had to hammer on the floor with a blackboard pointer. That's enough, Ralph, she said, and went on with the story. I don't think it's very nice to say Mary was pregnant, Alice whispered to me. But she was, I pointed out. In a way, though, I agreed with her. It sounded too ordinary. Anybody could be pregnant. Great with child sounded better for Mary. I'm not supposed to talk about people being pregnant. Alice folded her hands in her lap and pinched her lips together. I'd better tell my mother. Tell her what? That your mother is talking about things like that in church. My mother might not want me to be here. I'm pretty sure she would do it. She wanted to be Mary, and she was mad at my mother. I knew, too, that she would make it sound worse than it was, and Mrs. Winkledum would get madder than she already was. Mrs. Winkledum didn't even want cats to have kittens or birds to lay eggs, and she wouldn't let Alice play with anybody who had 2 rabbits. But there wasn't much I could do about it, except pinch Alice, which I did. She yelped, and Mother separated us and made me sit beside Imogene Herdman and sent Alice to sit in the middle of the baby angels. I wasn't crazy to sit next to Imogene. After all, I'd spent my whole life staying away from Imogene, but she didn't even notice me, not much anyway. Shut up, was all she said. I want to hear her. I couldn't believe it. Among other things, the Herdmans were famous for never sitting still and never paying attention to anyone. Teachers, parents, their own or anybody else's, the truant officer, the police. Yet here they were, eyes glued on my mother and taking in every word. What's that? They would yell whenever they didn't understand the language. And when Mother read about there being no room at the inn, Imogene's jaw dropped and she sat up in her seat. My God, she said, not even for Jesus? I saw Alice purse her lips together, so I knew that was something else Mrs. Winkledum would hear about, swearing in the church. Well, now, after all, Mother explained, nobody knew that the baby was going to turn out to be Jesus. You said Mary knew, Ralph said. Why didn't she tell them? I would have told them, Imogene put in. Boy, would I have told them. What was the matter with Joseph that he didn't tell them her pregnant and everything, she grumbled. What was that they laid the baby in? Leroy said. That manger, is that like a bed? Why would they have a bed in the barn? That's just the point, Mother said. They didn't have a bed in the barn, so Mary and Joseph had to use whatever there was. What would you do if you had a new baby and no bed to put the baby in? We put Gladys in a bureau drawer, Imogene volunteered. Well, there you are, Mother said, blinking a little. You didn't have a bed for Gladys, so you had to use something else. Oh, we had a bed, Ralph said. Only Ollie wouldn't get out of it.